I invite you to turn with me today to Exodus chapter 20, looking at verses 3 through 7. And the message today is entitled, No Other Gods. Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 3. God says, You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in the heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Last week I introduced you to the principle of the law. We looked at the 6th through the 10th commandments last week. We understood last week that the law is good and necessary. The law establishes order and levels the field of life. Without law, there is chaos. Without law, there is no respect given and no respect received for anyone. And yet God has written His law on the hearts of every human being. And we instinctively know what is right and what is wrong because He tells us so in our innermost being, even if we choose not to listen to that voice inside of us that tells us right and wrong, good and evil. This week I want us to examine the principles that God gives us in the first 3 of the Big 10 Commandments and explore our relationship to the one true God. First, I want to tell you the story of one of our Olympic athletes, David Godiva, a diver on the Olympic team. He writes in the FCA Road to Gold devotional, For much of my life I bowed down at the feet of gods fashioned out of gold and silver and bronze. David watched the Olympics when he was 7 years old, and he spent the rest of his childhood and adult life pursuing a dream. He was the best diver in the United States and one of the best in the world, but in 2008, at the Beijing Olympics, he failed to earn a medal in synchronized diving, and he came in 10th in the individual event. He had considered Olympic success would bring him fame and fortune. Even more than that, he thought it might give him the American dream, and that the rest of his life would be pleasant and easy. Even more than that, he thought that accomplishing his Olympic goal would give him a lifetime of contentedness and joy. Failure to reach his goal brought him depression and disappointment and a worthlessness that permeated his psyche and his spirit to the very core. He enrolled, after 2008, he enrolled at the Purdue University and contemplated suicide. And yet, even in that failure, he thought that perhaps his name and his fame might give him some measure of satisfaction. What he found out was that the momentary pleasures of life are fleeting. Nothing brought lasting joy. Nothing brought him peace. Nothing was able to fill the void that he had in his heart. And when he went back to the pool and looked to his coach for some meaning and direction, instead of giving him diving instruction, he gave him life coaching. And he pointed him to the cross of Jesus Christ. What became clear over the next months to David was that Jesus was real. God actually loved him. In spite of his failures, and his identity was transformed. No longer did he seek validation from a sport, but now he found his true identity, his true purpose, his true contentment in Jesus. Not only that, he began to realize that God had given him the talent and the platform. You can take that in two ways, because he dives from the 10-meter platform, 30 feet in the air. God had given him the talent and the platform so that God could be glorified, not so that David could be glorified. When David Bodiah and his partner Steele Johnson won silver medals in synchronized diving in the Rio Olympics, afterward at the interview with the NBC affiliate, he said, "When my life was oriented around diving, I was a mess. But when I reoriented my life around Jesus, everything came in to focus." He said, "Win or lose in diving, that is not who I am. I belong to Jesus. And that's where I really am." At the Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, there are more than 11,000 athletes from 207 countries, and each one is hoping that they will get one of the medals in only 306 classifications. Now there's gold, silver, and bronze in each one of those, but there are only 306 opportunities to earn a medal for 11,000 athletes. That means 10,000 of them are going to walk away a failure in their sport. But they could still walk away success in life. As I was researching the Olympic Games this week, I came across a website, a Christian website, that explored and dissected all of the pagan Greek roots of the Olympics. Share this with you just as an aside. Remarkably, some of the ancient traditions are still being carried on in order to keep the history alive. And they are pagan, they are unholy, and they are performances, if you will, in an art form of a lost society that tributes to a culture which worships something less than the true God. No one really believes that those ancient gods or ceremonies have any real power or appeal. No one thinks that Zeus or Apollo, or Diana, or the other gods of the ancient Greek culture were anything other than invented or imagined. And there are still people today who are inventing gods of their own, even if they're not worshiping those particular ones. Paul, who lived during the time when all of those gods were being worshipped on a regular basis, said to us, the church, that they were nothing. They represented nothing. And that God, Jehovah, was the only thing that was real. Those gods were created by man, worshipped by man, but how can what is created control the thing or the person that created? And even though these gods are no longer worshipped, it doesn't mean that there are no false gods today. See, it doesn't take much to create a god. Little g, God. It only takes a little bit of imagination and something of a backstory. Some of you may remember several years ago when I was cutting down a tree, and I brought in part of the tree that I had carved, just to demonstrate to you how foolish it is for us to make our own gods. There should be, of course, for any god that one might create a reward. Maybe something as simple as a chance in another life, or even the American dream might be what that god would reward you with. You see, we can make anything a god to us. It could be, as David Bodiah wanted, fortune or fame or pleasure. We can make achievement our god. We can make our work our god. We can even make our spouse or our children our god. Anything that occupies the first place in our hearts. Anything which has transposed itself with the one true God can become a false God. God spoke through the prophet Isaiah, chapter 44, verses 9 and 10, said, "All who make idols are nothing, and the things they treasure are worthless. Those who would speak up for them are blind, and they are ignorant to their own shame. Who casts a god or shapes an idol which can profit him nothing? He and his kind will be put to shame. For the craftsmen are nothing but men." I wanted this morning to encourage you, to inspire you, to set aside the worthless things and find your true self, even as David Bodiah has done. To find your highest accomplishment and fulfillment in the true God, the Creator of heaven and earth. You see, pursuit of anything less is meaningless. Chasing after fame or fortune will not satisfy the real longing of our hearts. And the reason that God instructed us to put nothing else before Him wasn't because He's an egomaniac. It wasn't because He wouldn't be satisfied until we gave Him all of our attention. No, it was because He knew that we would not be satisfied until that void that only He could fill, He was in. Until we gave Him all the praise and glory that He deserves. David Warren, in his book, Purpose-Driven Life, reminds us that the number one purpose for each of us as individual human beings, the number one purpose for which we were created, is to worship God. Think about that just a minute. The number one purpose of your life is to worship God. And you can never be fully fulfilled in this life until you begin to fulfill that purpose. Here's a wonderful corollary, if you will, to that. Once we fit God in place, all the other pieces of our lives begin to make sense. And everything fits perfectly together. Excuse me. And the picture is completed. Amen. Jesus said to us in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, "But seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all the other things will be added to you as well." Life is not about those other things. We're not to be chasing after the things of this life. We're supposed to be focused on the kingdom. And yet when we get the kingdom in its proper place and our focus is on God, he says, oh, by the way, here are some other things. All of the parts and pieces of this life will begin to make perfect sense and will accomplish their purpose and his purpose in us and through us. Allow me for a few moments to close and recap the wonderful commandments that God's given to us. You should have no other gods before him. Why give this command? Because our Creator knows that nothing else will really, truly satisfy us. He said, don't make any graven images. See, God understands that anything from creation is created. And the only thing that is not created is him. If we look to creation for our salvation, nothing will come. Nothing that we might design or build could ever measure up to the wonder and the majesty and the glory that belongs to God and God alone. We would just be wasting our time and our talents and our treasures. And then he says, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. You see, our language is important. If we repeat a lie often enough, we might even come to believe that it's true. And so we must be careful what we call God. His instruction was for us and for those who would hear our words and our conversation, for he is the only God. And salvation is found nowhere else. God knew that. So he said, be careful. Keep his name sacred. And we must be careful when we call out to God as well. Because if we call out to him, do we really want him to show up? God's name belongs to him and to no one else. I hope as you enjoy the performances at the Olympics during the next week or so that's left, that you'll think about those 11,000 athletes and coaches and their Olympic officials, and that you'll pray for them. That they would not establish as primary in their life any goal other than God. And that as they begin to put God in first place and put their desires and hopes and dreams in second place, that then God would give them these other things as well. Pray specifically that there in Rio de Janeiro, in the shadow of the statue of Cristo Redentor, that many who have never heard the name of Christ would be touched and would look to him. That they would turn their gaze away from lesser things and begin to honor the one true God. And I pray for you today that if you've allowed something else to take first place in your heart, and you know that pain of not having fulfillment, that you would put God first as well. And that once he's in place, all the other pieces of your life will begin to make sense.